I invite you to open up your Pew Bibles, Psalm 49, 1 to 12. And there'll be a second passage after the first one. So page 811. Psalm 49. Hear this, all you peoples. Listen, all who live in this world, both low and high, rich and poor alike. My mouth will speak words of wisdom. The meditation of my heart will give you understanding. I will turn my ear to a proverb. With the harp I will expound my riddle. Why should I fear when evil days come, when wicked deceivers surround me, those who trust in their wealth and boast on their great riches? No one can redeem the life of another or give to God a ransom for them. For the ransom for a life is costly. No payment is ever enough, so that they should live on forever and not see decay. For all can see that the wise die, that the foolish and the senseless also perish, leaving their wealth to others. Their tombs will remain their houses forever, their dwellings for endless generations, though they had named lands after themselves. People, despite their wealth, do not endure. They are like the beasts that perish. The second reading is Mark and chapter 10, 35 to 45. So Mark 10, 35 to 45. That's on page 1442. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him. "Teacher," they said, "we want you to do for us whatever we ask." "What do you want me to do for you?" he asked. They replied, "Let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory." "You don't know what you are asking," Jesus said. "Can you drink the cup I drink or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with?" "We can," they answered. Jesus said to them, "You will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared." When the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. Jesus called them together and said, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave to all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Good morning. I want to ask, have you ever accidentally left a price tag on a present? It's fair warning, you've got a week to sort it out. It's one of those things that I'm very careful about, but I'm certain that I've done it, that I've left the sticker on, that I've left the tag on, that I've missed something that was attached in a place I hadn't noticed on a gift. And now this might be just another thing in my ongoing saga of Christmas-related things that I don't understand. We've been used to that over the last couple of weeks. But I've been wondering this week, why do we care so much about it? About the price tag, about removing the price tag. Maybe it's just a habit, we've always done it. Maybe it's for enjoyment. We find it immensely satisfying to peel off stickers. Or maybe it's more personal. Sometimes I want to spend more on people than I know I should, more than they'd expect me to spend. I want to get them something special, but I don't want them to know how special it is. At other times, I don't want to spend too much. I care about the person enough to give them a gift, but I don't want them to know how little it cost. And at other times, as Tom mentioned, we kind of want to leave the price tag on because we're a bit proud of it. We got a real bargain, something that was really expensive, but that didn't actually cost us very much. And maybe these are some of the reasons why we care about price tags and why we usually remove them from the presents that we give. Now, over the past couple of weeks, we've been looking at the Incarnation. And the consistent picture that we've had for the Incarnation is that it is a gift. That the incarnate Son, Jesus, is a gift to humanity. A couple of weeks ago, we saw the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, how the Son of God came to our place, came to earth, became poor, became human for us, to give us the gift of relationship with God that we need. And then we saw last week that the gift isn't just the coming of the Son of God. Jesus' life, his incarnate life, was a life lived in our place. And that's part of God's gift to us. Jesus lived a life of obedience to God, a life of dependence on God, and that's a life given to us so that we can enjoy the benefits of life in relationship with God because we've been given them in Jesus. That was last week. And today we'll continue to expand our picture of the gift of the incarnation of the Son of God. We'll see how the gift of God in the incarnation includes Jesus' death and how essential it is for the incarnate Son of God to die in our place. To help us see this, we're going to look at two prices that are seen in Jesus' death. The price that humanity puts on God and the price that God pays for humanity. They're the two things we're going to look at today. So firstly, the price that humanity puts on God. It might be a funny thing for us to think about putting a price on God. But the reality is that showing the value of things is something that we do quite easily in all sorts of areas of our lives, in all kinds of ways, in all kinds of relationships. As far as God is concerned, he's made it clear to humanity what he is worth. He is infinitely worthy. And the way that the Bible talks about God's worth is glory, the glory of God. Everything God is and does is about displaying his glory, communicating his greatness and his goodness, showing that he is God. And there are things in creation and humanity that are impressive, that are amazing, that are glorious. But the glorious things in creation and in humanity are meant to lead us to see the glory of the one who made them, the one who is God, so that we see in God the infinite worth that he has and is, and so that we rightly relate to him with obedience and dependence and awe. But the glory of God is also a problem for humanity. Because when it comes down to it, we want his glory for ourselves. We want to be treated as important and significant and valuable by him and by others. Now, sometimes this is subtle. Like in the passage that was read to us from Mark chapter 10. We had James and John, two of Jesus' disciples, are there. Along with the rest of the 12, they've been with Jesus for around 3 years. And they've seen in Jesus someone whose godly authority and glory and power are unmistakable, undeniable, even when hidden by his humanity. Now, they've seen someone worthy of worship along with God, someone to be served because he is God, someone glorious. But then we read this in Mark chapter 10, verse 35. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to Jesus. Teacher, they said, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. In other words, they want Jesus, glorious as he is, the Son of God as he is, to serve them. But they're not silly. They don't want to be obvious about it. So when Jesus gives them the reply, what do you want me to do for you? They say this to him in verse 37. Let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory. It's as if they're saying, don't worry, Jesus, you're still God, but you slot us into our rightful place too, above everyone else. Deal? You can see why the other disciples were indignant. What we see in James and John is an example of the price that humanity places on God, seen here in how we treat Jesus. Even when we see God up close in the person of Jesus, even when we see his glory, even when that leads us to value him highly, we can still find ways to look down on him. We can still devalue him and demean him and dismiss him. This is the price that even believers can subtly place on God as we go through life. Yes, God is glorious. Yes, he is worthy. But we'll treat him that way on our terms. Like James and John, we can try to come to an arrangement with God. If he serves us, marches to the beat of our drum, puts us above others, then absolutely he's worth a lot to us. But if God challenges us, then our answer is that he must be further down, lower than me. If we want to see the truth about humanity, if you want to see this in action, all we have to do is look at the cross. In Matthew 21, Jesus tells people before the cross what humanity is going to do to him. It's a parable about tenants. Let me read it to you. This is Matthew chapter 21, verse 33. There was a landowner who planted a vineyard. He put a wall around it, dug a winepress in it, and built a watchtower. Then he rented the vineyard to some farmers and moved to another place. When the harvest time approached, he sent his servants to the tenants to collect his fruit. The tenants seized his servants. They beat one, killed another, and stoned a third. Then he sent other servants to them more than the first time, and the tenants treated them the same way. Last of all, he sent his son to them. They will respect my son, he said. But when the tenants saw the son, they said to each other, this is the heir. Come, let's kill him and take his inheritance. So they took him and threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. That is a shocking story, isn't it? It's a shocking, sickening parable. And while Jesus directed this parable particularly at Jewish religious leaders, the response to God, the response to Jesus we see in this parable isn't unique to the religious leaders. Like the rest of humanity, these leaders only valued God if he benefits them, if he takes his place under them. In Jesus' coming in his life and ministry, humanity meets God in the flesh. The person we encounter is human, like us in every way. Living, breathing, speaking, teaching, touching. But at the same time, in everything he says and does, Jesus' divine authority, his glory and his power are seen. They are unmistakable, even when hidden by his humanity. And so Jesus, in his human and divine glory, confronts humanity. We can think of ourselves as important and significant when we think God is at a distance. But we can't keep the charade going when God is right here with us. But for a humanity who wants to be God, to establish God in the pecking order, having God right there with us is too close. And having God right there and vulnerable like never before is an opportunity too good to pass up. So at the hands of humanity, Jesus, the glorious Son of God, was devalued. Though he was God, he was treated as less than human. we know what happened. Betrayed for 30 pieces of silver, mistreated and mocked, punched and spat on, whipped, beaten and hung on a cross to die. That's what humanity does to God. The humanity that wanted to be God put Jesus Christ, God's Son, to death. Now, often when we consider the cross, we think about the guilt of those directly involved. Maybe the religious leaders or the high priests or the Sanhedrin. Maybe we think of the Gentile rulers like Pilate or Herod. Maybe we think of the crowds or the Roman military. And we try to evaluate who was more or less responsible, who was more or less guilty. But one of the things about the cross is that even at the time, this was a crime by humanity. People from all walks of life, from multiple cultures, privileged and poor, were involved in the death of Jesus. All united in their desire to be God, united in their sin against God, united in their guilt at the death of God in the incarnate Son, Jesus. Now, we might not have physically killed Jesus, but we're no different from those who did. We're part of humanity along with them that wants to devalue God, that wants to be God. When we see Jesus, when we recognize his glory, because he is God, when we recognize that if he's God, then we can't be, then our actions can so easily be the same as theirs. As the English theologian T.F. Torrance wrote, if Christ came today, we would still crucify him. It's shocking, it's sickening, but the humanity who killed Jesus then is the same humanity that we see now. Humanity now continues to say that we are God and that he is not. We'll value God if he does what we want, but we'll devalue and demean and dismiss him if he doesn't. The cross shows us the price that humanity puts on God. As God comes near to us in the person of Jesus, we show that we treat him as worthless, or at best as worth less than us. And the cross confirms for us, for humanity as a whole, the reason for our condemnation before God. That's the first price that we see at the cross, the price that humanity puts on God. But the cross also shows us another price, the price that God pays for humanity. And that's our second point. Now, you might be intrigued, possibly even shocked to hear that we have different perspectives about murder in our household. Pests of all kinds are in danger from Kylie. Whether they're spiders or flies or mosquitoes, she won't shed a tear for any of them. There's no mourning. I'm not quite as ruthless. I'll look at insects with the kids and then escort them outside. Though Kylie and I are on the same page about mice and cockroaches, so that's good. But even as I share that with you, I'm not worried that you're going to report me. I know that murdering insects in cold blood isn't something that I need to hide. I'm not sure that anyone would care, but please tell me if you do. Justice probably isn't coming for me because the life of an insect isn't worth that much. But what about the life of a human? What is it worth? Our governments and law courts have thoughts about this. Insurance companies have thoughts about this. And God has thoughts about this too. In our reading from Psalm 49, the psalmist says this: no one can redeem the life of another or give to God a ransom for them. The ransom for a life is too costly. No payment is ever enough. It's quite a statement. To God, life is precious, too valuable to even measure. As the psalmist says, no amount of money can buy a life. No one could trade anything for a life, not even their own. Even if you came to God with all the riches in the world, it wouldn't even cover the cost for one. The ransom for a life is too costly. No payment is ever enough. Now, this matters to us as humanity because of the death that we deserve. The punishment of spiritual death from God that we deserve because of the way we treated him, for the way that humanity has always treated him. Our guilt for devaluing not just another human being, as horrific as that is, but our devaluing of the infinite, glorious God. But then in the same psalm, the psalmist says something surprising, something hopeful. The very human psalmist writes this in verse 15. But God will redeem me from the realm of the dead. He will surely take me to himself. Isn't that interesting? Now, there is a confidence here in the psalmist that's just fascinating. On the one hand, the psalmist writes, no one can redeem the life of another. But then he says, God will redeem me. He will take me to himself. Now, the hope here for the psalmist isn't just for life after death. That was a given. There is life after death for humanity. The question is where that future life will be lived in relation to God, accepted by him or under his just judgment. And the thing for us to grasp from this psalm is that if redemption is coming for humanity, if life beyond death means being accepted by God, if that's even a possibility, then that has to come from God and not from us. Now, in Mark chapter 10, verse 45, even before Jesus' death on the cross, he tells us how God was going to pull this off, how God was going to pay the price. Jesus said, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." And this might be a familiar verse for us. We might have found it a helpful verse in the past to encourage us to serve others, to put others first. But the part of Jesus' statement for us to focus on is the second half of the verse, that Jesus came to give his life as a ransom for many. During the week, I was looking up the rarest jobs in Australia, the occupations that are done by the fewest number of people. Do you know what it was at the top of the list? Any guesses? No? I'll tell you what it is. Bungee jump master. Bungee jump master. That is the rarest job in Australia. There are only 6 people who do that job in the whole country. And it was closely followed, just out of interest, it was closely followed by shark tagger and submarine head chef. So there you go. Now, if you're able and willing to take on those roles, then you'd be only one of a handful of people to do it. But how many people are able and willing to pay the price for humanity? To deal with the cause and the consequences of our sin against God? Well, prior to the Incarnation, none. It was impossible for our sin to be dealt with. But in the Incarnation, God made a way for the price to be paid, for many to be ransomed back to him, to be brought back through his incarnate Son. Now, we get this foreshadowed for us in the Old Testament sacrificial system, how God did this. In the sacrificial system, God showed what it would take for the guilt and punishment for sin to be dealt with, for God's justice and mercy to be maintained in the process. Now, it was just a shadow of the reality that we see at the cross, but it was still costly. Now, the sacrificial system shows us that a substitute for the sinner would be needed. At the time, that substitute was an animal, a perfect, spotless animal provided by the sinner to take their place. And then, in sending his Son, God is the one who has presented this substitute. A human substitute, unblemished by sin, completely obedient to God, willing to stand in the place of the sinner. That's who Jesus is. But the ransom price was even higher. It couldn't just be met by a perfect human. Under the sacrificial system, it wasn't enough to present a perfect animal. The animal had to die. For human sin to be dealt with, the perfect human substitute had to die as well. Not because God is bloodthirsty, but because death is the penalty for sin, and blood is the ransom price for life. The substitute's death taking the penalty that the sinner deserved, and their blood paying the ransom for the sinner's life. And only Jesus could do this. And only Jesus did this. He was a perfectly innocent human, taking the punishment for the guilty. But the ransom price was even higher. It couldn't just be met by the death of a perfect human. If Jesus was only a perfect, servant-hearted, sacrificial human, and he died for a crime that he hadn't committed, then a terrible injustice would still be done. Even if he was willing, it would still be unjust. God can't just condemn someone else and maintain his justice. It would be like if I went out to your car in the car park and I threw a rock and shattered your windscreen, glass, mess everywhere. And then I asked a random passerby to come and to pay for the damage. Nobody would think that that was okay. If I smash your windscreen, either I pay for it, or if I can't or won't, then you'll pay for it. But it's got to be one of us. In the same way, for my sin to be dealt with justly before God, then I must pay for it. I must take the consequences for my sin on myself. I must take the punishment of death for my sin, my blood paying the price, or God pays for it. He takes the consequences for my sin on himself. He takes the punishment of death for my sin, his blood paying the price for my life. But then how can God pay for it? God is spirit. He can't bleed. He doesn't have blood. He can't pay the price in blood, even if he wanted to. So it's impossible for God to shed his blood for us. And if he can't bleed, then God can't die, even if he wanted to. Death is something for physical creation, but not for a spiritual God. It's impossible for him. This is how high the ransom price for sin is. It's so high that not even God can deal with it and pay it himself. The psalmist is right. No one can redeem the life of another or give to God a ransom for them. The ransom for a life is too costly. No payment is ever enough. So how did God ransom humanity? This is part of the wonder and the brilliance of God seen in the Incarnation. See, God sent Jesus, his incarnate Son, into the world, his incarnate Son who is fully human, who can bleed, who can die. As a human, he can be a substitute for us, dying in our place, shedding his blood to pay for our sin. And God sent his incarnate Son, who is also fully God. He is not a third party in this. He's not a victim or an innocent bystander. As God, Jesus is sinned against by us. And he is uniquely able to die for us, shedding his blood, paying the price for our sin, while maintaining God's justice and showing his mercy. And what's extraordinary as well is that the price that God pays in Jesus' death isn't just for one person. Remember, as Jesus himself said, this is a ransom for many. Because Jesus is fully God, he has infinite worth, infinite glory. And so Jesus' death is valuable enough not just to ransom one human, but to ransom many. His death is sufficient to deal with the sin and guilt of many. The ransom is drawing down on the infinite wealth of God paid through his Son, Jesus, so that all of us who trust in the death of Jesus can be certain that our sin and guilt are gone, paid for. We can be certain that we've been brought back by God, brought back to live with him as our God forever. Now, if this price has been paid for us, if we've seen what it cost to buy us back, then our view of the God who has paid it has to be different. Our satisfaction and our identity are no longer meant to be found in comparison with God or each other, with competition. Instead, our view and our value of each other are found in God's view, in his value of us, seen in what he's done for us. But keeping this mindset, it isn't always easy. Maybe it's an end of year thing, but I feel like we see more evidence of our desire to be God at times like this. When people are tired and stressed, when everything seems urgent, when we're all under pressure. That's the time when my needs and the things I think are important grow larger and larger in my mind. And sure, there's lots of contributing factors to this, but it boils down to the price that we put on God. Is he truly God in my life? Or do I see myself in that position? This answer will change how we treat him, will change how we treat each other. When we see our mindset shifting back to ourselves, when we see ourselves devaluing God in some way, even small, we need to come back to the cross to see our place in the human action against God and to see God's paying the price for us to bring us back to himself so that we can align ourselves under God's loving care, under his rule, in relation to his glory once more. As we've looked at the cross today, we've seen two prices in one event. In the action of humanity at the cross, we've seen the small price that we put on God in how we've treated him. But at the same time, in the same event, we've seen the ransom price that God has paid for humanity. Price that he's paid in the coming and life and death of his incarnate son, Jesus. The only way that price could be paid. The only way that we could be saved from sin. Now, over the coming week, as we receive gifts, we probably won't know what they cost. Even if someone leaves the price tag on, that still won't tell us everything, will it? But as we've seen today, and as we'll remember over this Christmas season, we have a gift that God has left the price tag on. The gift of his incarnate Son, who gave his life as a ransom for us, for sinful humanity, for the many. He's the one who's paid the price to take our place, to deal with our sin, to buy us back, to bring us back under God's loving care and rule for our good and for his glory. It's worth us remembering that this week. Let me lead us in prayer. Heavenly Father, we give you great thanks for your greatness, for your goodness, for your glory. We give you thanks for the way that you've shown us these things in your incarnate Son. Despite the way we've treated you, devaluing you as the infinite glorious God, you have dealt with our sin, you've dealt with our guilt and with the death that we deserve. We give you thanks that your Son Jesus came to give his life as a ransom for many, as a ransom for us, that we might be brought back to you. As we see what you've done, as we see your glory, please help us. Help us to align our lives under you, living under your care and rule in this season, and glorifying you for all the days you give us. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.